Okay, this is All Ships Follow Me by Mieke Eerkens. Chapter 4. Men over 10. Camp Bangkok, Dutch East Indies, September 1944. Camp Bangkok is a former Catholic convent with an attached school. When my father arrives with the other boys from Lampraseri, the classrooms have been cleared of their desks and chairs, and the chapel has been cleared of their pews, to be turned into housing for prisoners. Inside, there are hundreds of men, old and young. As the boys arrive, female prisoners leave the camp through the back gate. They are headed to Lampraseri, or Camp Halmahera, swapped for the new men over 10. The only women left in the camp are a handful of nuns, whom the Japanese keep to work as nurses for them. Sheffy recognizes the same officers from Lampraseri, who rotate between the camps. John the Whacker, Hockey Stick, Little Co. His pulse quickens as he passes the officers who beat him for the rice incident. The boys haven't managed to leave these officers behind. Sheffy's friend Peter is not doing well with the transfer. A few weeks earlier, his mother had died in Lampraseri, and his teenage sister had been taking care of him. Peter was still in mourning, sobbing daily when he was ordered to leave for Bangkok, whereas some of the boys are mature for their age. He is a young 11. His sister and the other women had begged the officers to let him stay with them in Lampraseri, given his recent loss. The officers refused, shouted that he had to get in line with the other men over 10. As Peter stood there, tears running down his cheeks, his sister ran to him again to tell him to be brave. A conscripted Korean heiho, or camp guard, watching this, immediately stormed up to them and hit the girl in the lower back with the blunt end of his bayonet-tipped rifle. As he did so, the bayonet end caught Peter's thigh, causing a gash. So this is how they parted. The sister knocked to the ground, her little brother limping and bleeding out of the camp, while sobbing and looking over his shoulder until he could not see her anymore. As he left his sister behind, something in Peter cracked, and all the children saw it. On the walk to the new camp, he stared ahead, expressionless. "Peter, it's going to be okay," Sheffy whispered, but Peter didn't look at him. He limped with his injured leg, struggling to keep up. Falling back to the end of the line like a zombie, he plodded on, silent, dragging his injured leg. When the boys arrived in Camp Bangkok, they were told to get in formation and say their names to count off, but Peter didn't say his name or count off. Catatonic, he stared straight ahead. The officer in charge interpreted this as insolence and decided to make Peter an example for the others. He motioned two other officers over. They dragged Peter out in front of the rows of boys. Sheffy's heart drilled against his heart. He willed his friend to speak. "Name. Count." Peter did not answer. The officer in charge pulled out a bamboo rod and brought it down on Peter's shoulders. He stumbled, but did not speak. "Name. Count." He was beaten to the ground with the rod each time he failed to respond, then pulled back onto his feet by the other two officers for another round. "Name. Count. Name. Count." Despite Sheffy's silent pleading, Peter did not open his mouth. Bleeding from open cuts on his face and back, he didn't cry, and he didn't talk. This seemed only to make the officer more angry, and he beat him harder. Ultimately, when Peter couldn't stand on his feet anymore, two officers carried his bloody body to the sick bay. There he lies, staring straight ahead. He refuses to drink water or eat rice. The nuns are at a loss. One of them asks around and learns that Sheffy is his friend. She asks Sheffy to come talk to him. He has to drink and eat. Sheffy stands by his bed and says, "Come on, Peter. This is a terrible situation, but you have to snap out of it to get better. I'll help you. We have to get through it." Peter finally speaks. "Mammy." It's the only word he repeats every time anyone pleads with him. The nurses give Peter's untouched portion of rice to Sheffy, who swallows it down gladly, despite the flies that had been sitting on it for a few hours. Then they send him out. Sheffy learns of Peter's death when the nuns give him his friend's suitcase a few days later. Unlike Chevy's suitcase, which is filled with clothes and practical items. Peter's Sheffy suitcase contained mainly toys, including an erector set. It's a special treat for the boys. Something to play with. Anything to distract them. My father concedes that watching his friend die of a broken heart at a young age affected him in a profound way. I articulate it for him, and he nods. Feel too much, and you could die. Yes, maybe that's true. It's something understood, implicitly in the camps. The boys in the camps don't show their soft underbellies when they can help it. They go into the latrines to shed their tears if they feel them coming during the day, and as soon as the sun sets and their sleeping quarters go dark, echoing back from the walls and ceilings are the sounds of anonymous plunged sniffles and muffled sounds. The dark also masks older men who hunch over the more vulnerable boys in the black night. My father observes all this, the tangible consequences of weakness, and he carries the knowledge with him for the rest of his life. The first month at Bangkok is very difficult for the boys. One boy with diabetes dies within a week because there's no insulin in the camp. When I begin to research the camps, I find dozens of journals kept by POWs, including boys in my father's camp, donated to the archives of the Netherlands Institute of War Documentation. The entries in the beginning of these journals reveal profound heartache and loneliness, children missing their mothers, but even for these children, most more immediate physical discomforts quickly take the place of these soul pains. Initially, Sheffy sleeps in the chapel at the center of the camp. The boys sleep on 2-by-4-foot kesselers, thin mats on the floor. At night, bedbugs crawl over their bodies, the camp being completely infested with them, and many of the boys' journals describe the stench of the bedbugs that hang perpetually in the air. The welts pepper their skin, but the boys' bodies are exhausted, and eventually, despite the biting bugs, they sleep the sleep of the fatigued. Having come home from a day in the petrol field to 1 cup of rice, or half a 30-inch square of rubbery tapioca, everyone in the camp, approximately 1,500 men and boys, wash themselves under 2 primitive cold water showers, or at least at an elevated concrete mandi basin containing buckets of water. Each person tries to bathe once or twice a week. Like the men in the camp, each boy gets a white armband with a Japanese number written on it that corresponds to his living quarters. The boys learn the alert signals for roll call, airstrikes, meals, and lights out. Sheffy moves into the end room on the top floor in the north wing of the cloister, with 30 boys per room. 3 rooms form a han, which is headed by a hancho, or section head, and an assistant head called a kamicho. The European hanchos and kamichos are selected from the older man POWs in the camp and assigned to watch over the boys. Every night, on a rotating basis, 2 boys have to walk back and forth in front of the han to make sure order is kept. If a Japanese officer approaches, the boys must repeat the words that they have been taught. My father recites them for me. Dai Gohan, Fushinban, Fuku Madyo, Iyo Manison. He says this means, this is Han 5. I am the night watch. There is nothing unusual to report. They never learn the words to say if there is something unusual to report. This becomes clear when one night a boy they've nicknamed Penki goes missing. Penki is in Han 5 with Sheffy. Like a few other children of internees, Penki is an Indo boy, half Dutch, half Indonesian. This means that unlike the blonde, blue-eyed boys in that camp, he could slip undetected into the Indonesian population outside the fence, something he figures out how to do. In the dark, Penki sneaks out of the camp when the officers are distracted and goes to the nearby kampungs. The Indonesians give him a chicken and fruit, and Penki smuggles the fruit back into camp. He does this for several nights until one night his luck runs out. He's captured by a patrolling officer, and the camp sirens wail through the halls at 3 a.m. The boys and men have 5 minutes to file into the center of the camp. Eyes blinking with sleep, hearts pounding, they rush down the stairs and get in formation for roll call. In the black of night, a Japanese officer walks down the rows. He stops in front of each honcho, asking for a head count and the number of sick in the Han. As in customary at roll call, the officer stops in front of a honcho for Sheffy's Han, an older man from Luxembourg. The man states the number of boys in the Han. To the best of his knowledge, having been woken only moments earlier, the officer asks him to repeat the number, then asks him again. The honcho falters, confused. The number comes out as questioned the third time. Sheffy's breath catches in his throat. What is going on? Suddenly, the officer removes his belt and begins to beat the honcho in the head with the belt buckle until the honcho falls, covering himself. Lies! How dare you lie to me? The officer yells as the blows fall. Stunned and bleeding from the cut in his head, the honcho looks up, confused. The officer calls out, and some officers lead a handcuffed Penko into the clearing. The officer shines a flashlight into Penko's bloody, swollen face. He's held up by the officers, unable to stand. Who was on night watch when the boy escaped? The officer demands. 2 terrified boys are produced from within the rows. These boys are also beaten. Then the whole camp is subjected to an hour-long rant in Japanese, translated into Indonesian, about the severe consequences of attempted escapes. There will be zero tolerance. Finally, they are allowed to return to the sleeping quarters, except for Penki, who is locked into a storage room with bars over the open windows so everyone can see him as an example. Penki stays locked up for 3 days, guarded by a camp officer with a bayonet. He is under orders not to receive food or water. By the second day, one of the Korean officers begins to take pity as the boy becomes dehydrated and looks the other way as someone slips him a can of water through the bars, saving his life. But the Japanese officers haven't finished making Penki an example for the others. After 3 days, 2 Kempe Tai officers arrive just as the payolers return from the fields. They sit at a table in the center of the camp, and Penki is brought before them. They sentence him to a water torture, which is carried out immediately in front of hundreds of horrified boys and men. Penki is tied, withering and screaming, to a bele, a bamboo cot. A hose is inserted into his mouth and turned on while they hold his nose shut. His belly swells. The officers turn the bele upside down, then begin to heat his distended belly with a rod until he vomits the water. The 12-year-old Penki survives the torture, but nobody dares attempt an escape after that. The officers and the Camp Tai are not the only enemies inside the camp. The older prisoners can be just as bad. Power corrupts, even when power comes in the form of a prisoner given the task of watching over a group of children weaker than he is. The Comanche of Sheffy's Han has a mosquito net over his kissalar. Unlike most of the prisoners, he sleeps with Sheffy on one side of him and an 11-year-old boy named Hans on the other side. Sheffy hears the Komiko whisper to Hans in the dark, "Come under my mosquito net so you won't be stung." Sheffy, while naive, knows something isn't right with this. In the night, he hears Hans sobbing from underneath the mosquito net, and the Komicho whispering angrily for him to stay quiet. Covering his mouth, Sheffy thinks about telling someone, but he keeps quiet, afraid the Komicho will turn to his other side in the night and reach for him instead. One night, Hans becomes very ill with sudden fever, moaning softly on his mat. In the morning, his body is cold and stiffening, just feet away from Sheffy. This memory still gnaws at my father, who knows if the Komicho had anything to do with Hans' death. He knows that he himself dodged something very bad, and he feels guilt for having done so. I read other vague references to molestation with the older prisoners in some of the diaries of the boys in my father's camp, and realize again how the threat of this possibility shapes life philosophies in young, formative minds. Self-preservation at all costs, even if it means sacrificing someone else. As with food, where survival depends on each boy getting as much as he can for himself and not helping out his neighbor, the sexual abuse forces each of them into an impossible role of betrayer. If they speak up about what they see, they may become targets, so they keep quiet but feel enormous guilt about their decision. I'm glad it's him, because otherwise it would be me. In the camp, there is a makeshift medical facility and a pharmacy run by prisoners who are doctors. There isn't enough medicine, however, so the pharmacist is left to improvise, grinding up papaya leaves as a cure-all for any number of ailments. With a number of proper nutrition and oral hygiene, the boy's teeth start to develop abscesses. Sheffy, too, develops a tooth abscess. There's no dentist in the camp. He goes to the medical room and the doctor pulls the tooth without any anesthesia, then sends him to the pharmacy for some ground up papaya leaves. When the pharmacist sees Sheffy's last name, he asks, "Do you happen to be Dr. Eerkens' son?" "I worked with him in the hospital here in Sumering before your family moved to Midian," and so Sheffy lands a coveted job as the pharmacist's assistant and no longer has to work in the fields every day with the other payolas. Instead, he spends his day in the tiny pharmacist's room, grinding papaya leaves with a stone mortar and pestle, something that causes an enormous amount of jealousy in the other boys. Amoebic dysentery spreads through the camp because of unsterile water, and soon the latrines, open toilets with curtains separating each cubicle, are filled with boys who feel their bowels turned inside out, and those waiting cannot hold it. The ground in front of the latrines and the stairs to the latrines are covered in diarrhea each morning, to be cleaned up by the boys with their fortunate duty, and the disease spreads further. Many succumb, and there are more dead bodies than usual those weeks. Themes of morality and survival replace the theme of homesickness in the boys' diaries by this point in their interment. Sheffy had thought about where he would hide if the Japanese began to shoot them. These are the thoughts of a 13-year-old boy, based on rumors murmured through the camp. Initially, he thinks the latrines are his only option. Once those become a sea of feces, however, he begins to look for other options. He roams the hallways, scanning the buildings for possibilities. When he notices a place on the upper floor with a ceiling access panel that can be reached via a railing, he decides that this is where he will hide when they begin to shoot. But the daily misery in the camp also amplifies the smallest joys. Just as there is a daily reminder of the human capacity for cruelty, so too is there evidence of the human drive to connect and find points of light. Sheffy and the boys find moments of levity, along with moments of human kindness in the Japanese and Korean officers. I read in a journal of a boy crying in a corner of the camp, and an officer who, unexpectedly, sits beside him and confesses that he misses his family too. Patting the boy on the shoulder, I hold on to those rare moments in the relentless and depressing succession of stories, not only as a writer trying to find some variation of movement in the dark narrative, but as a human being who imagines her father and these scared boys all alone in horrendous circumstances. I wish for them the peace of a kinder world than they live in. Little Ko is one of the Korean officers. He is rumored to be homosexual by many of the boys because of his soft demeanor and his mannerisms, but he never behaves inappropriately with young men. He doesn't beat the boys for sport like some of the other officers, and he actually smiles at them from time to time. Little Ko loves music. He often hums when the other guards aren't looking. On Christmas Eve, he is left behind to oversee the camp while the other officers go into the city for their own event. Swearing the camp prisoners to secrecy, Little Ko disappears into the officers' quarters, asking two men to come with him. Amazingly, they emerge from the officers' quarters, rolling out an upright piano, which they place in the center of the camp. Sheffy and the boys crowd around. Little Ko asks for a volunteer, and a boy who is very good at playing the piano steps forward. He begins to play ragtime and jazz and Dutch Christmas songs. Little Ko beams, delighted by the boys' happiness. He gestures to the boys, "Sing, sing!" They sing and dance in their jitterbug with each other. One boy starts a soft shoe tap dance. They haven't heard music or even allowed to dance in years. It's been the best Christmas party most of them have ever had, simply for the sheer surprise of it. The boy playing the piano looks at Little Ko, who's dancing and smiling. He takes a calculated risk. He begins playing the Humalis, the Dutch anthem, national anthem, and the other boys sing along. Through the anthem explicitly banned by the Japanese, Little Ko doesn't know the anthem, and he sways along obviously beaming. After a couple hours, Little Cole drags the piano back into the officers' quarters before the other officers can return to discover what he's done. Unfortunately, somebody appears to have snitched, because a few days later, Little Cole is taken away and never returns to their camp. But my father still remembers this night, and his face lights up with the memory. He wonders how harshly Little Cole was punished, and when he knew how significant his act of kindness was, he was not a bad guy. He disappeared. They said that the Campite got after him and put him in jail for it. He was not supposed to fraternize with the enemy, which is what they considered us to be, my father says. The cruelty of the Japanese forces during World War II is well documented, and yet it is difficult to understand the reasoning behind the officers' cruelty toward my father and the other boys. Most of the officers were enlisted in the military involuntarily, so it isn't clear why they felt it necessary to be harsh towards their prisoners, especially when those prisoners were children. Little Cole brought some happiness into the lives of the prisoners he was charged with watching. It made them more agreeable. He could have been an example, but instead he was punished and removed as an officer. I think a lot about this. I think about this a lot. Perhaps it comes back to the human defense mechanism of compartmentalization. For many of the officers, I imagine it would be impossible for them to do their jobs and imprison other human beings if they did not vilify them. East versus West, white versus Asian, dehumanizing the prisoners was integral to maintaining the rules and order. Little Cole had to be punished for the act of his compassion. Sheffy still has contraband copies of Don Quixote and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that he snuck into the camp and hid in a spot under the rafters. He uses them to curry favor with the other boys, promising some temporary distraction after their days of silently plowing and planting rows of Japanese eggplant, spinach, cucumbers in the heat. The boys gather round and read aloud, savoring the words. Words are a desired commodity in the camp, far more valuable than they ever had outside of the barbed wire. The imagination inflaming adventures of sea monsters and Spanish wanderers are a reminder of when they were boys, or a reminder with each giggle and whisper as they huddle around the pages that perhaps they are still boys, and only pretending to be men. These moments of levity last until the day the Japanese officers announce that any remaining papers that hold or might hold Western words will be collected in offer of temporary amnesty, and thereafter any prisoner found with reading material will be punished severely. My father is given the job, along with another boy, of pushing a handcart through the camp to collect the books, and Don Quixote is the first to go onto the bed of the cart. The books are heaped in piles and taken to the officers for burning. The boys stand solemnly along the path, watching Don Quixote make his way past and out of sight on his way to the fire. Without their books, distraction becomes more and more important, because after many months of dwindling food, the prisoners are fading. They will do anything to stop thinking about the twisting in their guts. Sheffy looks at his ribs slash across his skin like zebra stripes. He thinks only of food. My sister asks him what they did when they felt how they got through the days. He says, "We were hungry. We couldn't think about anything else but food." And that is reflected in the camp diaries I read. This is what is remarkable about them, is how reliably every one of them becomes less and less about missing family or feeling lonely or the fear of being shot, and more about the diary writer's starving body. Until this is almost without fail the dominant topic of every page. Oh, what did I do? Oh, I guess I did get the right. Until that is almost without the fail the dominant topic on every page. With the sanitation problem in the camp come a lot of flies. The officer's way of dealing with this is to exploit the boys' hunger. They promise a spoonful of sugar for every 100 flies the boys can kill. The boys bring the belly-up insects to the officer's quarter to be counted. A spoonful of sugar is extremely valuable. It has calories. You can eat it or trade it. When the boys are given some coffee brought in from the plantations, they mix it with the sugar to take away their hunger pains. They call it dof daf, for the sound it made when they heard the mix. They beat the mixture in their cups. I read about their flies counting in their diaries. The ledgers of flies and handfuls of sugar as meticulously recorded as tax documents. It's an epiphany. It's an epiphany when I read this. Excuse me. As a strange behavioral tick of my father's falls into place. When I was a child, my father always went into an all-out assault on any flying insect that didn't I don't know how to pronounce that word, to enter our house. We had a fly swatter hanging in every room. My father seemed to relish inordinately the act of killing flies, dancing wildly across the room as if possessed, smacking the swatter onto objects until he exclaimed, "Got him! Ha ha! Bastard!" It was a running joke to my siblings and me. Oh, Dad and his flies. When I moved into a new apartment as an adult, my father was there to help me. He called a time out in the middle of unloading the U-Haul to drive to the hardware store down the road and returned with not one, but 3 fly swatters, because he had spotted a fly in my new apartment. He embarked on his usual fly swatting dance immediately. I always viewed my father's weird obsession with flies as amusing and quirky, but I never understood its source until I read those diaries and asked him about this dead fly award system in the camp. The next Christmas, I bought him an electric fly swatter called the Executioner. I've never seen him more pleased with the gift. In the last 6 months of their internment, the internees barely got anything to eat, outside of a 2 by 3 inch cube of starch paste mixed with sawdust, which they are instructed to break in half and consume for breakfast and dinner, as well as half a cup of rice. Only an occasional bit from protein from the payole fields where creatures scurry now supplements their diets. The Kipling's small crabs that occasionally crawl into the fields are a particularly rare treat to catch. The boys called the skinniest kids in the camp birdcage, teasing them for their rows of ribs. In one diary I read of a boy who was so emaciated the diary writer had mocked, "Woohoo, look at you, birdcage." "Hey, I'm not that bad," the boy responded. "I'm not a birdcage yet." But in the morning, he didn't wake up. Some of the boys' stomachs grew round, distended from the protein deficiency. Quash oiker. Sorry if I got that word wrong. Many of them see their feet and legs swell with edema from the vitamin B deficiency. Berry. Malnutrition make people go mad, and the boys become aware of this as they start to feel their minds fade along with their bodies. Every day now, a cold corpse remains on its mat in the morning when the others rise for roll call. Boys carry their friends out on stretchers made of bamboo, covered with thatched grass. Schlepping corpses is the least desired job in the camp, and to be tapped for. Sheffy tries to look busy in the pharmacy when he sees a body brought into the storage shed, but he, too, is tapped a few times to carry bodies out. In the tropical heat, the stretchers drip bodily fluids onto the boys' feet as they struggle to carry the dead across the camp and out through the front gate, where they are placed onto a cart to be brought to mass graves. Schlepping corpses gives boys the willies, but they don't dare admit it. They have to use these crude words and make light of what is becoming abundantly clear, the fact that they are starving to death, because if they look at it in the eye and acknowledge it, they may lose their sanity altogether. "Damn, I got tapped by the bloodhound to schlepp a corpse today," they say, yawning, acknowledging weakness like opening the door to their own mortality. So they scoff and deny and pretend they are superhuman, unaffected. There are 2 infamous brothers in the camp, the Shire brothers. As they lose weight, they begin to lose their minds too. With a bit of wire, they meticulously cut the grains of rice into 3 or 4 pieces, spending an hour or more hunched over their task each day. Then they eat each rice piece one by one to make the meal last longer. They inspire a new camp insult in the camp. Schreierling, a verb that means to show cracks in one's sanity with an obsessive-compulsive behavior. Stop schreierling is a common taunt heard in the camp whenever a boy begins measuring or counting his food. Some days... Oh, you sneeze? Oh, the beast sneezed. Some days, the women from Lampress area are brought to work in an adjacent field to the payoilers, and while they aren't allowed to speak, the mothers can scan the boys for their sons or the sons of others, and vice versa. These days are a psychological lifeline for the boys, and in diary after diary, I saw the excitement announcement, "I saw my mama today. She's alive and she waved to me." When Sheffy hears that the women have been in the pajoil fields for several days in a row, he asks another boy to switch places with him in the pharmacy, and he joins his cousin Keys and the pajoilers for a day. Sure enough, he looks across the field, and in the distance he sees his own thin mother, shovel in hand, staring across the field back at him under the stern under the stern watch of an officer, her message unspoken but understood. "Stay strong, I love you." In her diary during this period, my grandmother writes to her absent husband, "This paper has been in my Bible for more than a year now. Life is getting increasingly difficult. The boys have been in Camp Bangkok since September 13th. Last Wednesday I went to pull weeds in the fields and saw both of them. Wasn't allowed to speak to them, thankfully. They looked okay. There are more and more people dying in our group and over there as well. If this lasts much longer, the hatred will only grow stronger. I long and pray so hard that I will get to see you again, to be able to begin again and recover together, but God's will be done. I hope so much to be able to give you this letter in person as a diary, but if that doesn't come to pass, I'm grateful for everything I experienced in this life. Don't be bitter. The children are in God's hands." You all right? What you sneezing, huh? You okay? Her loneliness is palpable. She makes a tiny brooch out of some embroidery thread and photos of my grandfather, my father, and her nephew Keys, the men who have been sent away to other camps. She pins their images inside her clothing to keep them close to her. Tension and irritability increase on the part of all parties in the camps. The months plod on relentlessly with no sign of the situation ending. Hope begins to dwindle. The honchos become more like their captors every day, drunk with their power. Two of the honchos in Camp Bangkok are especially sadistic. The Dearnay brothers, increasingly they beat up the younger boys, one losing his cool and taking it out on their charges in a rage, until the other brother steps in to pull his sibling away, afraid the victim will die. Not only the prisoners show signs of mental decline, Hockey Stick, one of the most dreaded officers, has a complete breakdown one day. According to one diary, he has found a puppy in the street outside the camp and ties the animal to a rope to walk it around the camp as his new pet. Initially, this amuses the boys, of course, though at the stage of starvation they would just as soon as have a meal at the puppy to make their lives. According to the diary, the puppy, being just a puppy, will not walk next to Hockey Stick obediently. He demands that the puppy sit, pushing its bottom down, but the puppy pops back up and pulls at its leash. Hockey Stick barks orders at it in Japanese. Then he suddenly flies into a rage, swinging the puppy like a tetherball in a circle around his head violently, snapping its neck. He immediately collapses and begins weeping when he realizes he's killed it, talking to the dead puppy and trying to get its lifeless body to stand again. These boys also get in trouble more and more often as more mental stability begins to break down in the camp. They are beaten and told to stand in the sun as punishment for increasingly minor infractions. This entails standing under the clock for many hours with a bare torso, turning so the hot sun is always on one's blistered back as it moves across the sky. The Japanese post some news about the world outside the camp and the war, though it is always filtered through their propaganda machine. They announce glorious victories for the Nippon Empire, but the prisoners notice that these victories Victorious battles with the Allies are happening closer and closer to Indonesia, implying a decided Allied advance. Communication, or the prevention of communication, becomes a major theme in the camps. Until I began to research the camps, language was something I never thought of in relation to war. The way that it was withheld to keep people deaf, mute, and powerless. I see now how words were weapons, and their theft a tool of war. I see how words become precious in their scarcity in the same way that things like food and medicine and shoes did. What is more central to the human drive than communication? The Japanese cut this instinct off at every turn in the camp as a form of psychological warfare. They make the prisoners speak Bahasa and ban their native Dutch. They make them learn Japanese. They install the isolating gedik so they cannot communicate with the Indonesians outside the fence except in faceless whispers. They confiscate their books, their pens, their pencils, and paper in the camps are guarded and hoarded as obsessively as food. In the Bangkok Boys' diaries, this becomes clear. While reading them in the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation in Amsterdam, I marvel at the delicate creased onion skin paper of the letters and diaries, just like that of my grandmother's. The minuscule letters inscribed on every available centimeter, getting even smaller as words swarm toward the end of the paper with each page. Eventually, I have to ask at the desk if they have the magnifying glass I can borrow. Of course we do, the man there says, because many of the documents in the archives were written on the backs of wrappers and cigarette papers. He tells me, whatever a prisoner could get his hands on and hide from the authorities. It's surprising to me that, as a writer, I haven't registered this particular warship of war before. I suppose it's because I take words for granted. I've never once had to worry about having access to the tools of expression whenever I wanted to use them. I open my laptop and type. I use full sheets of thick white paper and write in big letters. Sometimes I cross things out in frustration, crumple the paper. Sometimes I crumple several pieces of paper. I complain about not getting the words right. I start over, I cut and paste, I shake my pen when it runs out of ink and drop it in the trash, then reach for another. This privilege comes into sharp relative relief as I sit hunched over a table in Amsterdam, squinting at Lilliputian script through a magnifying glass, noticing the economy of the tiny penciled attempts of one 13-year-old boy to document himself in abbreviations. 8 September, D. Spitz, died. 13 September, boys from Lampressary arrived. 9 September, J. Kramer, died. 28 September, won't lend my pencil anymore, getting too nubby. 1 October, can't think straight, have the runs. 29 October, earned 1 spoon sugar, catching 200 flies for officer, have malaria, pencil just nub now, problem with bee bugs. 28 February, miss my mother, air raid, is it Uncle Sam's? As their own words are progressively taken away, new words are put into the prisoners' mouths, words that they do not choose. They are encouraged to send postcards to their families abroad, something that initially causes surprise and excitement, but that excitement quickly sours. The postcards are white, 2 by 5 inches. A prisoner's message can consist only of 3 sentences chosen from among a list approved pre-printed sentences and copied word for word onto the postcard. I have dysentery and am starving to death, and over a third of the people in my camp have died, is not one of the included sentences. The approved sentences are, we internees are permitted to write home by the generous government of Nippon. My health is excellent, our camp is well equipped, and the accommodations are comfortable. Our daily life is very pleasant. We have plenty of food and much creation. The Japanese treat us well, so don't worry about me and never feel uneasy. We are permitted to grow vegetables and flowers which we like, and enjoy working in the open air. This is a land of perpetual summer, full of natural beauty with plenty of bananas, pineapples, mangostano, and coconuts. Love, blank. Of course, the words are ridiculously farce, but sending them at least allows a prisoner to communicate to loved ones that he is still alive. The reality of the prisoner's condition is such stark contrast to their postcards that the Red Cross determines that the prisoners are in crisis and delivers aid packages with food and medical supplies to the camps. On May 2nd, 1945, Bangkok receives a delivery, which is initially withheld from the prisoners and then delivered with great ceremony on May 16th. After the Japanese government receives international pressure for withholding humanitarian aid and relents, the Japanese officers post a long screed in the center of the camp, and a translator reads it to the prisoners in Dutch. The speech is titled, "Are Our Enemies Human?" It begins with the lines, "During the course of the Pacific War, Anglo-Americans have time and again been guilty of numerous instances totally opposed to the dictates of humanity." The announcement then details a long list of specific military strikes against Japan by the Allied forces. In retaliation, the Japanese government would be perfectly justified in withholding distribution of the relief supplies, nor would the Allies be in a position to lodge a protest against such action. To confiscate supplies destined for POWs would be an easy matter, as easy as twisting a child's hand, but the Japanese know that these internees and prisoners of war are not and should not be held responsible for the treachery of their governments. His Majesty had directed that these relief goods be distributed among captive and enemy nationals as originally planned, and this imperial order will be faithfully carried out. The prisoners are jubilant. The 100 aid packages are to be shared by around 1,300 men and boys in the camp. There is food they haven't seen in years. There are two types of packages, American and British, with slightly different contents, including canned corned beef, pram and spam, canned pudding, canned butter, condensed milk, chocolate, raisins, chewing gum, sugar, and processed cheese, among other things. It's a feast for the starved prisoners, even if 13 people have to share a package. In the corner, the Shire brothers segment their share of the food. Counting and recounting, Sheffy inhales his spam and goes for the chocolate. To hell with rationing. He's hungry right now. Camp Bangkok, Semarang, Indonesia, 2014. After we visit Lampersary, Jocko drives us to Camp Bangkok, the place of most significance for all of us. Both my father and I were astounded by how close to each other the two camps actually are. It would not have taken more than 45 minutes to walk between the two. It's a stark reminder to me of how subjective memory is, how there is no such thing as a fixed account of history, and how non-fiction, outside of dates and measurable facts, can only ever be one person's version of the truth. It's really, truly felt like hours that we were walking, my father says, and he seems genuinely troubled by the clear evidence that his memory doesn't catch up with the facts. For me, it's jarring as well, as I've always thought of the physical distance between my father and his mother as significant, and now must adjust a story which I have heard several times, but fact and truth are two different things. In the end, I think that regardless of how far the walk from Lampersary to Bangkok is in actual miles, to my father and those other boys who believed they were being taken to Bangkok and who would not speak to their families for years, it was a walk to the other side of the earth. That was and is their truth. Today, Camp Bangkok is a private school. Children in uniforms have their classes in the former internees' hands. My father shows us the hand where he slept upstairs as a videotape. As a videotape, children slip out of the class, the more extroverted ones giggling and performing for my camera. Their teacher comes out into the hall, and we try to explain why we are there, but she doesn't understand, though she allows my father to stick his head through the door of her classroom to see his old quarters. He laughs and waves at the children, a massive smile on his face. It's good to see the space now, filled with learning and joy. My father shows us the different parts of the camp, and I make him take me to where he was standing when the war ended so I could photograph him there. He shows us where the boy left via the back gate to work in the fields, where they stacked the bodies of campmates who died, where they carried them out. He shows me the pharmacy where he worked, now a locked utility closet. Meanwhile, it is the middle of a busy school day with oblivious children and teachers walking through the halls, and in the 21st century. It adds to the surreal experience of being in the spaces as my father explains what the function of each one was. We see another teacher near the chapel, and again we explain what we are doing there. She seems aware of the school's past, begins nodding, then hurries off. There is a small plaque on the wall outside the chapel that acknowledges the people who lost their lives there. The school director appears with the teacher who had just spoken to and a log for us to sign. She tells us that many children of former prisoners have been there. Prisoners of the camp have been there and signed the logbook. But in the past decade, my father is the only person she has met who is actually interred there himself and returned. She tells my father it is an honor to meet him and shakes his hand, which I can see makes him feel good. Later that evening, after an emotional day, my father and I visit the buffet on the roof of our hotel next to the infinity pool. My father cannot resist an all-you-can-eat buffet, often overfilling his plates on multiple trips. A chef stands at a station making stir-fry to order. Sauté and rice with the peanut sauces are available at another station. Fresh fruit salad and different Indonesian desserts are displayed on another table. It's a beautiful evening. The sun just setting. There is a live band playing music. The tropical air is cooled to the perfect temperature, and the views are spectacular. We look over the city to the Tayani Hills. Suddenly I realize that a building directly in our line of vision is unmistakably my father's former camp, the school we visited that day. "Oh my God, Dad, that's your camp right there." "Wow," he says, "it looks so small from here." For me, it offers a moment of symbolic satisfaction, seeing my father next to the pool, 70 years later, looking down at the place where he nearly starved to death with an all-you-can-eat plate of food. Hiroshima, Japan, August 6th, 1945. I'm going to look see how many pages I got left. It's already 34 minutes. Oh my goodness. How many pages I got left? Let's see. I have quite a few left. So I'm on page 90 right now. And the next chapter is on 110. So roughly maybe 20 pages left. So let's see if we can get this recorded. Hiroshima, Japan, August 6th, 1945. In the black of night, little boy passes over a sleeping Pacific, snug in the belly of Enola Gay, a worse misnomer than little boy for such a destructive and powerful force that cannot exist. The atomic bomb, the first the war will know, is armed just before 8 a.m. Just before little boy is released over the city of Hiroshima, the crew of the Enola Gay moves into place. There is a moment when the bomb falls, suspended in air, a moment between what little boy was and what little boy becomes in the timeline of history. In this liminal moment, innocent lives are being traded for another innocent lives, for as much as rightfully horrified minds have tried to reason that perhaps Japan would have surrendered on its own. The fact remains that it would not have been in time for my father or his family or most of the internees in their camps, who were months, if not weeks, from death by starvation on August 6, 1945. In some cases it would prove too late and they would die in the days that followed. This second in time, in which the belly of Enola Gay opens, determines that my father will live and others will not. It allows me to be born and prevent others from existing at all. It ensures the war trauma of generations of Japanese families. For 43 seconds, little boy plummets silently through the atmosphere. Then, in a flash, 70,000 people and an entire city center are blown cleanly off the map. These days later, Fat Man free falls over Nagasaki, sweeping another 40,000 to 75,000 lives from the earth. It saves my father's life. Camp Bangkok, Cimarron, Dutch East Indies, August 1945. He doesn't know it yet, of course, but in the week following the bombing of Nagasaki, Shafi hears distant explosions rumbling throughout the city, and the prisoners see planes. Smoke plumes rise into the sky, black and thick, only a few miles away. There are excited whispers through the camp. The prisoners don't know it, but what they are witnessing is the Allied fighters bombing the Semarang harbor. The Japanese officers are tense and quieter than usual. They patrol with their bayonets gripped tightly and don't bark the usual orders at the prisoners, keeping their eyes averted. They announce that the piolers will not be going to work in the fields this week. This announcement increases the rumors, but still the prisoners are unsure of what is going on. Some are afraid that the Japanese will kill them instead of surrender. Sheffy practices climbing up to a secret hiding spot, preparing himself. Then a small plane flies over the camp, dropping pieces of paper and rolling back and forth to wave its wings at them. These turn out to be Dutch pilots stationed in Balikpapan, the already liberated seaport city of Borneo. Almost all of the ships flutter off into the wind, missing the camp, but one or two land inside. They say, "T. Redding is now bit." The rescue is near. The few have been caught slips hide them from the officers, afraid of being harmed. After many false alarms, they begin to hope that this could be the real thing, and it is, sort of. The Japanese officially surrender on August 15th, 1945, but this fact is not announced to the prisoners, and officers stay at their posts, ordering the prisoners to remain in their barracks or in the yard. For another full week, the prisoners live in their limbo, unsure if the war has ended or if they have been doomed to be imprisoned forever or worse. A few succumb in this week, and the others carry the bodies out as usual. On August 23rd, Sheffy goes to his job in the pharmacy. While walking there, he hears shouting coming from behind the Gedik. Making sure nobody's looking, he climbs a pillar behind the pharmacy from where he could look over the double fence. There, he sees Indonesians running through the streets. One man spots him and calls out, "Hey boy, the war is over. It's over. Do you have clothing? Trade clothing for food," announced to him the Indonesians on the outside of the camps, while still having access to food, have had no access to textiles through the war, and clothing has become a valuable commodity. In the camps where close quarters mean lice and sweat, and it nearly impossible to keep a wardrobe clean, the boys and men haven't worn full clothes in years, and now wear only shorts or kawa, a loincloth that can easily rinse every day. The Indonesian man holds up a large bundle of bananas, and Sheffy can't believe his luck. He still has a couple of untouched shirts in his suitcase in the hand. Wait here, don't go away." He scrambles back down the pillar and runs as fast as he can to his hand. He returns out of breath with his shirt and scrambles back up the pillar. To his relief, the man is still there holding the bananas. "Throw the bananas over first," Sheffy yells, afraid it is a hoax. The man pauses, considering, but there are more bananas, and he regards a skeletal child behind the fence. He throws the bananas, and they land with a thud a few feet from Sheffy's pillar. Sheffy quickly balls up and throws up the shirt. The man catches it and smiles. Then Sheffy scrambles down so nobody else can grab his bananas. He wolfs one down immediately, then hides the rest of the bananas in a secret spot he has in the pharmacy, where sometimes the nuns leave him extra food from the unused rations of patients who die. There's another boy who works in the pharmacy, Fons, and Sheffy motions him over eagerly. He reveals the bananas, offering to share extra food as they usually do, but Fon frowns. "That's illegal. You can't talk to anyone outside the Gedik. You'll be in trouble." "Fine," Sheffy says. "You don't have to have any, but I'm eating them." An hour later, though, a honcho shows up. Sheffy has been ratted out. The bananas were confiscated, and Sheffy is ordered to stand under the clock in the sun as punishment. Sheffy watches his plump, beautiful bananas leave with the honcho and walks dejectedly to the clock. He stands there. Sweat trickles from his shorn head and down his face in the relentless sun. But around him, the camp begins to stir. Others have gotten similar offers from the other side of the Gedik. They start trading over the top of the fence too, and nothing happens. Sheffy looks around, notices that the Japanese officers who have been guarding them vigilantly for years have suddenly evaporated. He makes a cautious step from his pointed spot. Nothing happens. No officer appears. No John the Whacker. No bucket man. No hockey stick. He takes another cautious step. No pretty Carl. No bloodhound. And no chubby baby. They have all vanished. Nobody stops him. Takes a few more steps, looking around him. Nothing. Then he is running to the Gettick, where the others are now furiously trading, throwing clothing over the fence, as fruit, pastries, even meat come flying back over the top. Emboldened, most of the prisoners become tearing down the Gettick. Nobody stops them. They now climb through the hole and trade openly with the Indonesians. And then a low rumbling begins, a rumbling that swells to fill the corners of the camp. The sound of the prisoners have waited for every day of every week of every month of every year. These 3 years that they have waited for it, they have imagined it as they lay on the floor in the dark every night, while the bedbugs emerge from the cracks to swarm their bodies. They can hardly believe their ears now as the sound fills the air and vibrates through the bones. Sheffy looks up and sees not the red circle, but the stars, white on blue circles painted on the wings of an Allied plane as it passes over the camp. Grins stretch across the prisoners' hollowed faces. They cheer and wave, 2 arms over their heads, waving and waving, all necks craned, skyward, yelling, "We are here! We are here!" The plane circles back, flying low. My father shields his eyes, and he sees that the door of the plane is open. A soldier in an olive green uniform and a half-globe helmet is standing in the doorway, waving back at them, and there are thousands of tiny papers falling like snow from the plane. Sheffy joins the crowd around a man holding one of the slips of paper. He strains to see it. What does it say? The slip is printed in Japanese characters on one side, English on the other. The man reads aloud slowly, laboring over the English words. To all Allied prisoners of war, the Japanese forces have surrendered unconditionally. The war is over. We will get supplies to you as soon as it is humanly possible. We'll make arrangements to get you out, but owing to the distances involved, it may be some time before we can achieve this. You will help us and yourselves if you act as follows. Stay in your camp until you get further orders from us. Start preparing anonymous rolls of personnel, giving fullest particulars. List your most urgent necessities. If you've been starved or underfed for long periods, do not eat large quantities of solid food, fruits or vegetables at first. It is dangerous for you to do so. Gifts of food from the local population should be cooked. We want to get you back home quickly, safe and sound. We do not want to risk your chances from diarrhea, dysentery, and cholera at this last stage. Local authorities and Allied officers will take charge of your affairs in a very short time. Be guided by their advice. Late in the afternoon of August 23rd, the Japanese officers reappear to erect a platform in the center of the camp. Sheffy and the other prisoners are called to attention. They stand in rows before the podium. Then a grimace-faced commander in full uniform mounts the platform and begins speaking in Japanese while the translator translates. He tells them that the Japanese government officially surrendered on August 15th after the United States dropped 2 massive bombs in Japan on August 6th and 9th, and he has been ordered to release all POWs in the camp. Furthermore, he has been ordered to increase the food supply, including vegetables, and they are free to have as many servings of rice as they like. Sheffy and his campmates cheer. The officer finishes by telling them that the Red Cross has ordered them to stay in the camp for further instructions. Then he quickly exits the stage, hurrying back to offices where documents are hastily being destroyed to get rid of evidence for the War Crimes Tribunal that the Japanese know will be coming. The patio spades vanish, as does all other evidence of forced labor, and then the commander and officers retreat into the shadows, though they have been ordered to stay to keep the camp safe until the Red Cross arrives to take over. In the camp clearing, Sheffy and the others initially celebrate, cheering and dancing. Some were from some hiding place. Somebody produces a contraband Dutch flag, which is unfurled. They begin to sing the Dutch national anthem, but after they celebrate, they are left feeling stunned. They are free. Now what? They sit down to wait for the Red Cross as instructed. Not Sheffy. Sheffy finds his cousin Keys. Hey, listen, I'm not staying in this place for one more minute. I'm going to walk back to La Passerie to find Mom. Are you coming? Keys is afraid. Don't leave, we're supposed to wait for the Red Cross, he says, but as my father tells it now, he was sick of being told what to do. He no longer respected authority. He asks other boys in his hand to join them. They also are too scared to leave, so ultimately he leaves by himself. He gathers what possessions he has left, walks over the portion of the Gedek that has been torn down, and emerges onto the streets of Samarang, where the people stare at their emaciated, barefoot tuk-tuk. He asks Indonesians on the street directions to his mother's camp, though he vaguely remembers the way, remembering in reverse from the march of what seems a lifetime earlier. Now that he is finally outside the Gedek, he sees the efforts of the war on the Indonesian people. While they were free from internment, the war had been difficult for the Indonesians as well, particularly for those of the lower classes who were not given positions in the Japanese-ruled society. People on the street wear tattered clothing, some even passing him in a little more than burlap sacks. They too look thinner and worn down. He arrives at Lapasseria to find that the Gedek there has been torn down in places as well. He walks through the hole and follows the main road toward the Kapong house where his mother lived when he left the camp. The little children point at him as he passes. "Mama, look, a big boy," they call. He is just 14. They have not seen a boy over 10 years old in years. When my father walks into the barrack his mother's housed in, a woman's back is to him. The woman is hunched over a bucket washing her shirt, topless, and he sees the ladder of her vertebrae and her breasts hanging like empty skin from a concave chest. Horrified, he turns to leave just as the woman turns to face him. Her eyes fill with tears when they meet his. It takes moments before he registers with shock that this in fact is his own mother he is looking at. When my father tells me this story during my interviews for this book, it is the second and only time I have seen him cry. For several moments he cannot speak, shaking his head and clearing his throat. My mother, she is so emaciated I couldn't recognize her. That image, I'll never forget it. He covers his face, overcome with the memory. In the barrack that day, my grandmother takes him in the matchstick arms. His sisters and toddler brother come running in and gather around, hugging his brother Sheffy's back, alive. Across the island in eastern Java, Sheffy's father is freed from the camp in Baidung. As a military doctor, he is immediately enlisted in a rescue effort by the Dutch government to tend to the nearly 60,000 surviving civilian prisoners in the dozens of camps throughout the island of Java alone, who are malnourished and suffering from a variety of illnesses such as malaria, dysentery, and beriberi, and other vitamin deficiency diseases. He writes increasingly panicked letters to my grandmother during this time, sent through the Red Cross. Dear Bep, I do not know if you received the 2 postcards I sent a few days ago. Although I've made every effort to reach you, I have heard nothing back so far, which makes me worry, especially as the rumors are that it has been particularly bad in your camps in central Java. Thank God the misery has come to an end, although there are more difficulties ahead. Stay for time being in Semarang, where I hope to come and get you. Where we are going is not certain. I am doing okay. Have been ill during the internment in Banjo Bureau, where we did not have it easy. I've had influenza-like fevers a few times and once a hunger edema that passed. As a doctor in the camp, I always had something of privileged position and got something extra in the worst hunger periods. Kessler was the best in comparison with the other camps. Banjo Bureau, bad. Here, moderate, though we have it pretty good lately. Yet there has also been a lot of hunger, edema, and dysentery deaths here. I long to see you again, and will praise the day that we are together again. I hope all of us are still healthy. Goodbye, my dear. Keep your chin up. God bless you. Many kisses. Also to the children and co. From your Pep. Dear Pep, this is the 7th letter I've written to you since the capitulation, and I still have received no answer. The news arriving here from Central Java is very bad, and I am really very worried about you. I am trying to reach you through all possible channels. Are you trying it vice versa too? It would be a great assurance for me if I knew you were still alive and healthy. I cannot leave here yet. Officially, we cannot leave the camp. In addition, I work in the hospital and therefore cannot abandon my post. so I have to wait until an official arrangement has been made. You stay in Semmering. I hope to find you there. I was looking forward to seeing you all again. I'm doing fine. A bit older and thinner, maybe, but not bad. Dear Pep, just now I received a telegram from Pastor Decoy, from which I was extremely grateful. Thank God that you are still alive. The Red Cross has just been here, and I have asked them to send me to Central Java. 5 doctors have to go there, and I will be likely one of them. Either we will be divided amongst various camps, and then I will try and come to Semmering, or we will have an open hospital in Mage Lane. In any case, it will be closer to you and the connection easier. Mail still isn't arrived from Central Java, and people are very worried about this. But Batavia have been allowed to write. Rustic is here with me and asks how his wife is. Maastricht is also very worried. Well, goodbye, my dearest. I hope to see you soon. In the end, my father's family is one of the most families to be fully reunited, as most internees are still waiting to be evacuated from camps spread across Java. However, there have been losses that Sheffy and his father have only now hear about. They learn about the death of Aunt Leanne and one of my grandmother's closest friends, leaving her 2 children to be taken care of by my grandmother and Aunt Co. After a week, Cousin Keys arrives in Lampersary, having finally been left Bangkok with permission of the Red Cross. My grandfather is permitted to send a Red Cross message to the family in Bolivia and my grandmother's brother in Hague that they are safe and alive. Sheffy's mother and sister Georgie are both extremely malnourished and close to death. My grandmother has developed beriberi. The lack of food in the last months of war has been particularly bad in Lampersary, even worse than in Bangkok. Sheffy's sister tells him that their mother on one occasion was so weak that she fell while carrying that family's rations back to their quarters, and the broth and rice spilled out on the ground. Sheffy's father says that my grandmother and Georgie won't survive 2 more weeks without treatment, and he gives both injections and liver pills to reverse vitamin deficiencies that are destroying their organs. Food, plentiful now, is nonetheless introduced cautiously, as many discover that their bodies can no longer digest anything more than rice, and become extremely ill after the first meals of meat and vegetables. Flour and eggs come back into the camp, and Sheffy is put in charge of making a fire to bake the bread in. He feels like a man. One imagines that when prisoners are liberated, they immediately flee the confines of camps where they have been tortured and imprisoned to pick up their lives, but this is not the case. While conditions improve, the former internees still have no homes to go to. Having lost everything when they were interned years earlier, the Red Cross rations arrive in the camps. The doctors' medical facilities are in the camps. The administrators who take down their details are in the camps. So in the camps they have to stay. In that respect, little changes. People are also still dying, their organs now too damaged from malnutrition to be saved, even with vitamin injections. Every day my grandfather returns to his family with tears in his eyes as he tells them that as an internee who fought valiantly to have succumbed anyway, surviving to see the end of the war but too broken by it to recover. I cannot help but think of how in the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki similar scenes play out, as lives flicker out on pillows in burned wards with family gathered around. The war is over on both sides, but it's not over for those victims still succumbing to starvation or dysentery, burns, or radiation poisoning for their loved ones, just as for one of those Allied side. The war is never over. Close to the Lampersary camp in the Tundiri Hills, there is a former Dutch school that the Red Cross commissions as a temporary orphanage and school for the children whose parents have died during their internment. They ask my grandfather to become the director of the school. 2 widowed teachers are asked to become caretakers and teachers. A month after the war ends, Sheffy's family, Aunt Co., Aunt Leanne's 2 children, and Cousin Keys all move into the Defender School along with 100 orphans, the 2 teachers, and several widowers who work in the kitchens and garden. kitchen and garden. Amazingly, they are brought in jeeps driven by Japanese soldiers who are now under orders of the Red Cross and the Allied forces to help in the post-war recovery effort because they have an administrative infrastructure in place with essential vehicles and supplies. These Japanese soldiers bear little resemblance to the Japanese soldiers of a few months prior. These Japanese soldiers are courteous and polite. They don't strike anyone or make Sheffy and his family pass. There are two Sheffy and his family bow to them and say Kire, Kiotsuke, and Naor whenever they pass. There are two houses and a dormitory at the Van Venter School, and Sheffy and his family move into one of the houses near the front of the school along the circular drive. While caring for the orphans, my grandfather continues to work half days, treating patients at the Lampasari school. But being picked up in the morning by a Japanese soldier in a military vehicle and brought back in the afternoon, it seems that things are finally getting better. By the fall of 1945, the family has been living in the Van Venter School for about 2 weeks, and the orphans have started their classes, along with Jeffy and his siblings. All of them are quickly gaining weight, growing stronger each day. They know that the Indonesian leaders Sukarno and Hatta declared independence on August 17th, 2 days after Japan's surrender, and the Dutch government has not accepted the declaration, insisting on holding on to its pre-war rule of the country. My grandparents know that there is a civil unrest, with freedom fighters protesting and rioting in some places near Batavia. But for most Dutch who have been isolated inside the camps for years, they naively believe that everything will go back to the way it was before the war, and don't fully grasp how the flames of revolt are catching and building. Moving quickly from village to village, the uprising feels far away. They receive mail back from my grandmother's brother in Hague, addressed to Sis and Pep, my grandparents, and the rest of the family. How overjoyed we were with your short message that relieved our worry over your fate. What a nightmare it must have been experienced. If only you survived the period of unrest that Java is currently in. Try to come to Holland as quickly as possible. It's safe here again, though not everything is ideal. Did my sister recover from the beriberi all right? It's impossible to explain in a short letter. I have to finish it quickly because it will be taken with someone from the Red Cross. Everything that we experienced here with the Germans. The main thing is we have survived. Even mother and father are doing okay, although they lost almost everything. They are living back in Arnhem. During the assault in Arnhem in September 1944, they fled on foot with only one suitcase. Unfortunately, the evacuation was too much for Pa Eerkens. He had been operated on twice in the winter and was very weak. In October 1944, he passed away in the emergency hospital in Nijkerk. Sad for you, Pep, that you won't be able to see your father again. Although the family in Holland worries about the imminent escalating revolution, my grandfather cannot just leave even if he wants to. He is still a doctor employed by the Dutch military and is tasked with the care of thousands of former POWs. He was slowly recovering from the malnutrition and diseases in the makeshift Red Cross hospitals. My grandparents don't feel it too dangerous to stay. But the working class local Indonesians see their chance to upend a system that has been kept them down economically, while the Dutch colonists, sultans, Chinese merchants, and wealthy Indonesians in business with a colonial ruling class all prospered. They begin to attack their different groups with a rallying cry of independence. This happens within the relative chaos of the pre-war recovery period. The Dutch civilians have not been present in Indonesian society for years. At this point, we're oblivious to the level of anger that has been growing in numbers of the community, who have been fed continuous anti-Western literature and films by the Japanese troops throughout the war. For years, the Indonesians have heard that Asia is for Asians and that the Dutch are using them. Now the Dutch are emerging from the camps. Many of the Indonesians aren't interested in a return to the way things were. Japan, meanwhile, had begun manipulating and mistreating the Indonesian people as well during the war, causing resentment against all the occupiers, Dutch and Japanese. Things have not gotten better for the Indonesians under Japanese rule, as they had been promised, but had only gotten worse. The Indonesians are tired of being ruled by outsiders. When the British troops arrived to help restore order, to organize the rescue of the interned Dutch, the transport of Japanese soldiers began back to Japan. The arrest of Japanese officers. There is a vacuum of leadership. The British are there only temporarily, aren't solely focused on getting all subjects back to their respective homes. They don't know that when they tell Japanese soldiers to lay down their arms, many of them give their weapons to local Indonesian independence fighters, either voluntarily or under pressure. In short, there's a lot of naivety, effective, or a lack of order, much suffering, and a lot of resentment. The perfect cocktail for an uprising. Maybe another 6 pages or so. The initial fighting is near the capital in western Java, so it is peaceful in the school on the hill where Sheffy has resumed his studies and play and meals around the table with his family, till one day it isn't. The Bersiap, the violent uprising that marks this early period of the Indonesia National Revolution, spreads and comes to Semarang. Civilian rebels, often with no organized command, begin to attack all non-Indonesians, conducting raids on households where they drag the men out and murder them or kidnap them, demanding ransom. Mixed blood Indos are also targeted, and those who have been allowed to have outside the Japanese internment camps because of their mixed heritage are now left without the same protection as the reinterned Japanese Indonesians inside the guarded camps. Thousands of men, women, and children, entire families living in villages all over Java, are murdered by the pelopers, or rebels, in the name of restoring the country to the Indonesians. When the pelopers begin to move through Semarang, it surprises my father's family completely. My grandfather leaves in the morning for Lampasari Camp Hospital to take care of the internees. While he is gone, Sheffy and the other children sitting at their desks begin to hear shooting explosions. They have barely had a reprieve from this sound at the end of the war, so they know it well. The teachers suspend class and take the orphans into the dormitory to be safe. Sheffy and his siblings hurry back to their house, where their mother is anxiously peering out the window. Then they hear a truck crushing gravel on the drive, coming to a halt just outside. 4 Indonesian men get out, holding rifles. Pelopers, rebel fighters. Sheffy's heart is pounding. The rebels shout out, "Send out your men." Sheffy's mother turns out Sheffy and Cousin Keys, shaking. The teenagers are both taller than she is. "Get under the bed, boys. Get under the bed right now." Sheffy and Cousin Keys scramble to the bedroom and crawl on their bellies under the bed, terrified. The pelopers are at their front door now, pounding. "Send out your men." My grandmother shouts back through the locked door, "There are no men here, only women and children." The pelopers move to the other side of the school. They kick in a side door. They emerge with 5 male kitchen and garden workers, whom they load into the truck with guns at their backs. They yell, "We are coming back. You can't hide." Then they drive off. The children are all crying. Sheffy and Cousin Keys stay under the bed for a long time. Once they are certain the truck is gone, Sheffy and Cousin Keys are allowed to come out from under the bed. But my grandmother tells them to get back down low in a back bedroom. She runs through the inside door to the dormitory to check on the orphans. The teachers order all the children to sit in the hallway while they stand guard at each end with an iron bar in their hands. From the top of the hill, Sheffy can hear shooting and explosions through Semarang. The family sits together in a back bedroom, too terrified to come out. Finally, after the sun sets, they hear another truck come up the driveway. Sheffy's mother pushes the boys back under the bed, holding her finger to the lips. Footsteps, then voices. Japanese voices. There is a knock at the door. My grandmother calls through and the voices say that they are safe. She opens the door. There she is greeted by a Japanese officer, 3 Japanese soldiers, and her husband, who has been escorted back through the fighting from Lampasari, sick with worry for his family. The Japanese officer tells the family that he has been ordered to protect the orphanage against the pelopers with a detachment of Japanese soldiers. He quickly has the soldiers take up guard positions at the main corners of the grounds and asks permission to use one of the storage rooms in the school for sleeping quarters. Sheffy cannot wrap his head around this development. The same troops that have been his enemies and captors a month prior are now his protectors and saviors. 5 or 6 Japanese soldiers stand guard day and night For weeks as a civil war for independence rages in the city below. The Allied forces are sending troops to handle the handover of power. But with the abrupt end to the war with Japan, it will take several weeks for them to arrive. So initially, the Japanese soldiers step into this new, unexpected role out of necessity. But in Semarang, they soon become committed to this new responsibility after a violent showdown with the Pelopers. The rebels have given to a Japanese garrison in Semarang and demand that the soldiers stand at attention in the courtyard while the Pelopers read a proclamation that the country are now under Indonesian control and the soldiers should put their weapons down. Approximately 100 Japanese soldiers, trained to follow orders, put their weapons down. The Pelopers gather the weapons and gun down the Japanese soldiers execution style. A few of the soldiers pretend to be dead and lie still under the corpses until the Pelopers leave. Then the survivors crawl out from underneath the bodies and race to the Japanese garrison in Semarang and have not yet been attacked to warn them. The infuriated Japanese military commander of Semarang declares martial war. The rebels now have a new enemy. It takes the Japanese military 3 days to gain control of the city. At the orphanage, despite the protection of the Japanese soldiers at their posts, the rebels make another attempt on the school. One afternoon, the children hear gunfire coming from a small kampong behind the school. They are immediately told to lay flat on the floor. Sheffy lays on the floor as the new Japanese guard draws his revolver and slowly walks towards the kampong while his soldiers cover him. He looks up the coconut trees from where the bullets came and aims his pistol. A Pelopor jumps out of the tree and runs. They are not shot at again. Van Den for School, Semarang, Indonesia, 2014. These days, the Van Den for School is a trade school. The buildings are still the same as we pull into the driveway. My father's face lights up. He recognizes the house attached to the school where he lived for a short period. We go into the school's office and introduce ourselves to the woman behind the desk, but she doesn't speak English. And my father's rudimentary Bahasa is not good enough to explain why we are here. She smiles and gestures to us to wait, then returns with a man who speaks some English. He explains to her that my father once lived here and that we'd like to take a look around. She smiles and joins the man in giving us a tour. In one hallway, my father stops us. "This is the hallway where the children were hiding from the rebels," he said. "This is the hallway." The man translates for the woman. It's hard to know what they think about the story. All over Indonesia there are murals and plaques commemorating the men who liberated the country from Dutch colonism. To the Indonesians, the Pelopors are martyrs. They are freedom fighters and heroes. End of 4.